Look, I've unequipped all the armor and equipment from my party and my main character, and now I'm naked in a cutscene.
Listen, stop calling now! I am calling the police.
If you followed the channel before, you'll know I sometimes play other games in the action RPG Souls-like genre. And today I've been sponsored by Square Enix to play the new Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin game. It's on the PlayStation consoles, Xbox consoles and PC. I was playing on PC, and if you yourself have played other Souls-like games, it might look familiar to you. It really has a very strong focus on switching jobs, even mid-combat, and that kind of reminded me of Blood Codes from Code Vein. Also, to add to that, one of the developer studios working on this game, alongside Square Enix, is Team Ninja. And Team Ninja, of course, are the ones who created Ninja Gaiden, but also Nioh and Nioh 2, which are very, very solid games. I've covered that series on the channel before as well. With that said, I could definitely see the influence there from Team Ninja in this new Final Fantasy game, particularly in the looting and combat systems. Just look at all the equipment and loot we obtained from defeating enemies, completing missions, and opening treasure chests. We could get the same piece of equipment, but it may have different job affinities or special effects, even different base stats, and it's all randomized, similar to the Nioh looting style. You even select missions from a world map. The map designs are quite linear, but with looping shortcut connections and bosses at the end of them. And most enemies and bosses seem to have specific weaknesses. I do quite enjoy this gameplay loop of constantly upgrading and switching out my gear from fight to fight. Might be because it's just quite different to the games I normally play, like Dark Souls and Elden Ring. I will say it can get a bit overwhelming as well with messy inventories, especially if you're managing your entire party as well. But there is a button you can press to just optimize everything automatically that at least does some of the groundwork for you, and then you can just go in and fine-tune things. And with regards to the flow of action, you end up mixing and swapping playstyles frequently, from the swordsman job to the mage job, or the pugilist job, which is like a hand or fist combat specialist. Ultimately, there's a ton of freedom here. The action combat is very Team Ninja style as well. You could describe it as a corridor fighter, with an emphasis on button combos for special attacks, but with the ability to swap between two jobs mid-combat to add a layer of tactical depth and diversity. So I've opened there with just some connections and comparisons to other relevant games in the genre, I feel anyway. But of course, the context of Stranger of Paradise is that it is a Final Fantasy game, and there are many references to past Final Fantasy titles, and it's even set within the world and lore, kind of, or it's like a reimagining of the first Final Fantasy game. Now, to be honest, I have barely played the Final Fantasy series, so the story and lore wasn't too interesting to me, but I wouldn't say you need to be familiar with the series to enjoy this one, because the strength of this game is the combat and job systems. It feels good to control, attacks feel powerful and satisfying, and the gameplay loop works. The characters, like Jack, the protagonist you play as, are quite over-the-top anime style. Quite cheesy, which I know a lot of people enjoy, so I guess it's just preference, but it wasn't what I played this for personally. Graphically and story-wise, this game is pretty average, so I was glad the combat was well done. Although one slight downside was enemies had very fast attacks sometimes that felt almost impossible to avoid. Not everything has the most obvious wind-ups or tells in some cases, but maybe you could argue it's more difficult to be aware of what's going on when there's so many crazy special attacks. Visual events, particle effects, it can get very chaotic. The general story revealed from the beginning is you're trying to restore 4 corrupted crystals. You play as Jack with a small party of teammates trying to save the Cornelia Kingdom conquered by darkness. And the way to do this is by defeating chaos. One thing I noticed with Final Fantasy games is they're very cutscene heavy, at least to me as a typical Dark Souls player. Furthering the story, there are also message and sort of small exposition drops you find scattered around the level, which provide a lot of context and story. Now, as a Souls-like game in some respects, it can be quite difficult, but it's customizable here, literally. And death is not very punishing at all, in fact. I think you just lose some total mana points, and obviously you get reset to the last cube you rested at, but really nothing too severe. They recommend starting on the highest difficulty because you get better rewards and loot if you do that. But you can always bump it down if you get stuck, which is easy to do at any cube during any mission. cubes are the checkpoints of the game. Whenever you touch one, it refills your health and mana and gives you back your 5 healing potions and respawns all the enemies in the dungeon. Initially, I was finding that I could do the level fine on the hardest difficulty until I got to the boss. Not always, but generally I felt the bosses were much harder than the level itself, so I think that's around where I went down to the action mode difficulty. Then again, sometimes there would be just a random enemy in the level all by itself that destroyed me. Like an early Tonberry character, didn't look very imposing, but it was almost one-shotting me. It was kind of funny. To add to that, you can replay the levels with a different objective, and it's kind of encouraged. I think the level is often reversed as well, again kind of like Nioh. And the reason why that's a thing is to upgrade your gear and job level, because all the missions will have recommended levels. The rule of thumb is you want your average equipment level to at least match the mission level before attempting it. The lower your average equipment level is, the more break damage you receive and the less break damage you deal. You may have noticed with my gameplay I've been using a variety of weapons. You can only equip a weapon if it's usable for your job. For example, the swordsman can only use great swords, and the duelist uses knives, and so on and so on. That's actually how you unlock more of the starting jobs, by the way. You acquire the weapon associated with them. And then once you have the 8 basic jobs unlocked, you can start unlocking the advanced jobs from the relevant job trees. If you go down the job trees, you'll see at the bottom you have other classes to unlock. So you can actually plan your way towards your desired advanced jobs if you want to. And it's smart to do so, in fact. And then you can repeat the process for the final level of expert jobs as well. Leveling up the jobs and job trees are a really big part of the game. There's 27 in total, from things like Assassin, Red Mage, Dragoon, Berserker, Monk, and so on. You can even change your party members' jobs and equipment, although to a lesser extent. I did have some cool moments in particular playing this game. Most of them were very interesting combat interactions. For example, the Soul Shield ability can literally steal enemy attacks. You can block with a weapon or shield, but you can also time a Soul Shield, which is almost like a parry. If you time it correctly, you can absorb an enemy attack with your Soul Shield, and that will restore mana points. However, certain enemies have special attacks which will appear in a written form above their heads. And if you block their ability with Soul Shield, you will gain that ability, with limited uses, to unleash back on the caster, or you could save it and unleash it on other enemies. You steal their attack and use it yourself, essentially. It's situational, obviously, but it's really satisfying. There's also the finishing move in the game called Soul Burst. When you reduce an enemy's break gauge to 0, it puts them in a break state, where you can perform a finishing blow, bursting them apart into crystals, and it reduces nearby enemy break gauges as well. It felt like you could do this to almost any enemy, maybe every enemy, and most of them have custom animations, even the boss fights. It's really cool. When your max MP has 2 or more bars, you can consume them to activate Lightbringer. What this does is blast all nearby enemies away and makes it easier to finish them. It's very good when you're surrounded, which frequently happens. I probably should mention as well that this game's actually quite funny in a way. Like this random cactus enemy that just, I don't even know what it's doing. And I caught its 1,000 Needles attack and fired it back with the Soul Shield reversal I mentioned. That was good. But it just ran away in the end, making strange cartoon sound effects and disappeared. I'm sure it's a Final Fantasy reference I'm not aware of. The comments will probably let me know, but either way, I personally like amusing little things like that. It's a game after all, and it's entertaining. Some enemies have major weaknesses, like I said. There were these floating fiery bomb enemies, which if you unloaded a fire spell into them as one of the mage classes, it caused them to self-destruct. Which is strange, but I guess it overloads them or something. There was another point in a later level where a giant ballista was shooting at me, and I used it, or baited a shot, into a wooden fence that was blocking my path, and it actually destroyed it. I like level interactivity like that. It's a very simple puzzle, but it's a nice little detail. So overall, I enjoyed my first time playing. I didn't have as much time with the game as I'd like, so don't take this as a full review, but yeah, I just tried to highlight the unique aspects of this new Final Fantasy game, let you know a bit about it and my initial thoughts. In case you're wondering about performance, I was playing on PC, there were no game-breaking bugs or anything like that. Loading screens were quite long and frequent, I was on the performance mode, so the frame rate ran well for me at 60 frames per second consistently when in combat actually playing. Finally, a cool thing is you do have the option to play through the missions in co-op. So if you fancy experimenting with some cool builds and upgrading all your jobs to the expert level, farming that randomized loot and getting your character really strong with some buddies, this game could definitely be an option for you. Thanks once again to Square Enix for sponsoring this video. If you want to know more, there's a link in the description to the Stranger of Paradise website. There's even a sizable demo there you can try for free. Highly recommend checking out that link and giving it a look, give it a go yourself, see what you think. Thanks for watching everyone. New videos coming soon. It's obviously a very busy time for the channel. So yeah, see you soon. Ciao ciao.